How do we balance integrating both skill-based work and conditioning into our training? It can be difficult to do too much or lean on small-spinded games all the time, but should we always have the hurl, the sliotar or the Gaelic football in our hands at all times? Let's look at different strategies we can use here today to balance that out, to make sure everyone in terms of players, management, coaches and S&Cs are happy and are getting enough of an influence to try and benefit the overall team's performance to ensure everyone is playing at their best come important championship times. Third question came, I was actually asked this twice during the week. One, just a text from a fellow coach who's having a little bit of difficulty around some situations. Another one was from, I do a couple of consultancy calls with some S&C coaches around their planning, their integration and stuff, all like that. If interested, drop me an email, all like that. But both asked around, it's kind of first time working with hurling teams and they're both in S&C roles. And they're just finding the culture shock a little bit difficult and asking, how do I manage putting all of the S&C stuff in alongside the sport, because the hurling coaches generally want pretty much everything done with ball in hand, with hurling in hand, and as much as possible done through specific hurling stuff, let it be drills or games. And they're asking, I'm so used to doing a general prep warm-up, just a lot of general movement stuff, sprints with longer recovery where they're just recovering, they're not focusing on anything else. Doing all the plyo stuff, it can often take 15 to 20 minutes in before they get into their sport when they previously would work with, in these cases, Gaelic football and rugby. How do I convince the hurling coaches to let me have more time for general prep stuff? The simple answer is you don't. Hurling coaches will always want as much hurling done as possible. I have seen so many fallouts in backroom teams over this, because it's generally a new manager, or they get in an S&C and the S&C is so used to doing stuff the way they have in either rugby, Gaelic or Gaelic football, usually coming from those two. And it's a lot of general movement stuff at the start before they get stuck into the specific sport stuff. And hurling coaches just generally don't want that. They want as much as possibly done with ball in hand, with hurl in hand. The warm-up should be done through a few drill-like bits that incorporate various bits of movement. And the S&Cs are like, but it ends up either becoming way too intense too early, or it's just way too low level with too much recovery time for them to actually be getting warm. And I'm like, yep, that's it, but you're going to have to work around it. There's no convincing. The coaches generally don't want to change here. If you dig your heels in, keep doing what you've always been doing, you're going to end up with 4 to 6 minutes. The hurling coach will do the majority of the general movement warm-up. They'll hand them over to you for a few stretches, then they'll take them back. And that's it. That will be your impact. You might get them for a little bit of running at the end. You might be asked, take them to the corner and do a few stretches. And all the stuff you're coming in with as an S&C that you know is best practice here, you generally won't get to do much of it because you're trying to squeeze everything you think is required into a little 4 to 6 minute window. So you have to balance up. Do I do some dynamic stretches here? Do I do some plyos? Do I do a little bit of speed work? Do I do an ever so tiny bit of it all? Or do I just pick one and try and do that really well? Either way, you're going to end up having a fairly negligible impact based on how much time you have to do any of those, unless you start looking at, right, I need to think about the sport here. I need to think about a lot of the specific skill-based movements involved around hurling, striking, catching, hand passing, using both sides, higher work, lower work. How can you incorporate that? You'll end up having to start making up a few drills yourself, or looking at the hurling coaches and see what are they doing. How can I adapt these a little bit to make them a bit more warm-up friendly in terms of their overall intensity, so that I can use them as a warm-up to gradually build up the pace players are moving at, body temperature, how hard they're going, and dip a lot of the stretches in throughout all this. And maybe it's an out around the first cone, hand pass back, and you're thinking, this is very low level. I'm not really sure this is overly applicable to the game. Doesn't matter. The majority, players included, they want to be playing hurling. They went to the pitch to play hurling, not to do an awful lot of movement prep. Some might understand it's important, and it is really important, but generally you kind of have to disguise it into an awful lot of the hurling that's being done. So out around the first cone, hand pass back in groups 3 or 4. After 60 seconds, you stop and you might do some sidestepping or some karaoke or whatever. Then you go out on the second one and you do some striking. And you might vary it up by putting a few different colour cones, and suddenly you have to go to a different colour, and there's little bits of reaction time built in. And if the hurling coach is looking at you and they can see the skills involved, a couple of changes of intensity, even the odd bit of encouragement around, good catch, good strike, well done there, nice reaction, they'll suddenly start having more faith in you as the S&C to let you do a few more bits through hurling, start giving you a bit more time, and that's how you can start feeding in. Okay, well, after 3 rounds of different hurling type drill bits here, they're now ready for some plyos, and I can start dipping in some lower, progressing to medium tier plyos that I was planning on doing with them as part of the general movement prep anyway. It's just going to take me maybe a little bit longer to get there, or I have to dip out some other stuff to include the hurling specific bits. You need to look at how you can merge what you previously did in terms of what is best to get the required movements in alongside the traditional skills of the game, and see where they meet in the middle. And it's finding a few different activities you can use for that that's going to, first of all, keep the players bought in, because ultimately it's about them and what them having come and train, but also keep the sport specific coaches happy with what's being done, so they'll keep giving you time. Where it can be difficult is around the speed stuff. We know to do really good quality speed work, you need rest, and like longish rest and complete rest, not like, well, they're poking to each other, but if you actually look at them, they're constantly moving, they're constantly bouncing from one foot to the other. There's 2 steps right, there's 2 steps left. If the actual quality of skills there is a little bit down, they end up having to work a lot harder to make up for all the little mistakes they're doing. And one of the coaches I was on the call with said how he used to do a sprint, say 40 metres, and he gave him 4 minutes recovery, a minute for every 10 metres covered. And I said, in an ideal world, that's what you do. It's just not going to work. Like, that's going to take you 12 minutes, if not more, to do 3 40-metre sprints. You don't have that kind of luxury in training. While more recovery time will probably lead to better speed, there are an awful lot of other qualities that contribute to playing hurling well. Not just speed, not even just physical. There is all the technical and tactical stuff that potentially has far more of an impact than the physical stuff anyway. You need to shorten your recoveries, while not theoretically optimal. Do what you know you can get away with. I would hold hard here on sometimes when you say, okay, the 4 minutes of recovery, I'm going to let the hurling coach come in and do a little drill with him there. Everything just becomes too intense and has too much movement and detracts from the recovery you're going to give. You're better off having 1 quality minute of doing nothing than 3 minutes of fake recovery or low level work that has more of an impact on fatigue than what the sprint did in the first place. Again, while it's not perfect, it's going to lead to the best potential outcome for you. There are little ways you can look to, I'll say, trick the coaches here as well, in that go off a roll and clock. So if you're doing your sprints, have maybe, say if there's, 28 to train, have like 4 groups of 7 players at each. And when you blow your whistle to sprint, delay it so that you're blowing every 10 seconds. That means even if you just let a player go every 10 seconds, it's going to be at least 70, actually 80 now, great maths, John. It's going to be 80 seconds before the first person is going for their second rep. Let it be a 30-metre sprint or a flying 10-metre. It's not brilliant, but it's not terrible rest either. And because someone is going, or 4 players are going every 10 seconds, looking from the outside, there's a lot of work being done, and that way you can disguise the recovery. The while players A are recovering for 70, 80 seconds, player A, B, C, D, E, F, G is only going for their first rep there and then. It looks like there's a lot more happening and it's a lot busier, even though it's just your way of hiding in the recovery that actually is happening. It takes a few conversations around this as well to know, you as an S&C, how much time or what can you do? What are the hurling coaches comfortable letting you do and having an impact on? Try and figure out as much as possible what like the coach's key game principles or styles of play are. And number 1, make sure you're not negatively going against them. If they want to play a long type of game, but you want to put in these little small possession type games, that's going to have a very negative impact on the team's actual style of play. And while it may have a positive on the condition or the fitness or the keeping possession in small spaces, it will negatively impact the long game they want to practice playing as much as possible. And I was nutritionist with a team a few years ago, And the S&C had it planned out. They had their phases of condition built out on top of each other. And the third one was largely possession game focused. They weren't from hurling background. They didn't understand a lot of the principles of play and stuff. So they're doing an awful lot of small-sided stuff with no scoring outcomes that way. And they were into the session, and the manager was sorting something else logistically out. And he was an older man. I'd never seen him move particularly fast like that. But he walked out, saw the S&C coach leading 2 little possession games, and he ran as hard as he possibly could over to stop it up and say, no, you look after the physical, the hurling coaches look after the hurling. Now, I don't think that's an ideal way to go. I don't think we should be as separate and as siloed in what we do. There needs to be, first of all, far more conversations around, like, how did the manager not know what was in the session plan for that day? Were the physical and the technical talking to each other enough? In an ideal world, they'd be far more aligned anyway, in that the physical work would feed into the games-based stuff, and you try and marry them as much as possible within reason. But in that situation, they were completely siloed. It was clear they weren't talking to each other much, and it led to, like, just imagine how the players felt in that situation. The S&Cs, who'd never done that in hurling related with them before, were now doing possession games, and the manager steps in to stop it. It's hard across the board there for players to have full confidence in exactly what's happening around the whole setup, and will lead to negative outcomes, like, for the rest of the season potentially. If you've any potential questions you want answered, feel free to submit via email, the comment section here on Spotify, or whatever way you can get in contact. I'll do another one of these in 5 or 6 weeks time, just a 3 questions answer thing, and see can we go into the nuance of them. And I hopefully found these useful, and I will have another one out for you next week.